So there's the priest, the vicar, the bishop, the pope, and a 15-year-old choir boy standing at the bar. Oh, sorry. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. With us tonight we have Jillian Gilchrist, who's the Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice in Connecticut. Jillian is going to explain to us a little bit about herself, and then we're going to talk about some terms that have been stolen away from us over the years by, we'll say, the other side of the equation. And we'll try to take some of those terms back if we can. First of all, Jillian, explain who you are, what's your background, and what brought you to this point in time.
Great. So I am Jillian Gilchrist, Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut, going on, this is my third year. Came to Connecticut in 2000 to attend the University of Connecticut. In 2004, I graduated with a women's studies degree. From there, my focus was really on sexual violence prevention. And so I worked as a child advocate in Willimantic at a sexual assault crisis center up there. And then that got me really frustrated because we were one crisis center covering not only Windham County, New London County, and half of Tolland County. I was the only child advocate, and that area of the state is known as the quiet corner for a variety of reasons, but one being the high prevalence of child sexual abuse. So in my time there, one year I saw over 400 children. So I grew very frustrated and decided that I wanted to work in policy because I wanted to impact policy that affects sexual violence prevention. And so I was able to get a job with Denise Merrill at the state capitol.
Okay, good.
State Representative Denise Merrill, who at the time was the co-chair of the Appropriations Committee. I got some wonderful experience learning about the appropriations process, state government, and Denise Merrill was just an amazing mentor to me. From there I got my degree in policy practice at the UConn School of Social Work. And what led me to this point in time of working at NARAL Pro-Choice Connecticut, I actually had the opportunity to be working at the Capitol during the Emergency Contraception for Rape Victims debate. The first year of the debate, I was very naive, thought, of course this issue will pass, and just to give a little background, at the time Connecticut hospitals, not all hospitals were giving or offering rape victims emergency contraception, and so we were trying to pass a bill that would ensure that. And again, that first year, I just thought it was a no-brainer, and when I did see the filibuster happen and the bill die, I realized that until we, as women, have control over our bodies, we won't be able to really prevent sexual violence, that it all kind of comes back to this abortion debate. And so I got involved with NARAL.
I remember how Joe Lieberman played into this. Because Joe Lieberman, who had always been a staunch supporter of pro-choice and a women's right to choose, all of a sudden he said something about, well, if a woman goes to a hospital, and I guess it was specifically Catholic hospitals that did not want to provide, and yet at the same time wanted to get federal funding while breaking the law and not providing choice for women. His attitude was that, well, if you go to a hospital and they say no, well, there's always another hospital down the road.
Yeah, he said it was a small state. You could just drive on over to another hospital.
That was one of the things that took a lot of us, and a lot of our Progressive Soup team got us very angry at Joe. That, along with the war, a lot of other things. But while we're talking about pro-choice, define pro-choice. What does pro-choice actually mean?
Pro-choice means giving women all the information they need to make an informed decision. And so whether that means preventing an unattended pregnancy, choosing a legal abortion, or bearing a healthy child, it's ensuring that a woman has the information and access to the resources she needs to make that choice.
I'm going to bring in a little personal narrative because my daughters, they grew up in a household where we did a lot of respite adoptive care. We had a lot of kids that were special needs in the house. Amongst them were a lot of kids that had Downs. And both of my daughters, independent of one another, told me that, understanding that we as a family are very pro-choice, both of them told me, independent of the other, that if they said to me, Dad, first of all, understand, I'm not pregnant.
Yeah, I make that clear, yes.
Yes, they had to, of course, had to start off with that qualifier. And then the one, and then at a different time the other one said the same thing to me, that if I became pregnant, the one would say, the older one said it first, if I became pregnant and it turned out that the child had Downs, I would absolutely, positively want to carry that child to term and raise it. And that's part, as I understand it, that's a big part of being pro-choice.
Yeah.
Because in most cases, women do choose, if they've got the financial ability, if they've got a partner that's a reasonable human being to be supportive of them, then they will choose to have a child, because that's part of being pro-choice.
Exactly. If that's the choice that has been chosen, then we want to support that choice.
Absolutely. Now, what's the difference between pro-choice and pro-abortion? Maybe we touched on that a little bit. What separates pro-choice from pro-abortion?
I mean, I believe that that's just the anti-choice community's use of language. I wouldn't think that someone might, but I don't think the majority of people would ever claim the title pro-abortion.
I'm inclined to agree. I don't think anybody does either. I don't think any of us do. I mean, you know, abortion is something you do. You have an abortion if all else fails. If you can't find the means to bring a happy, healthy child into the world, if there are extraneous circumstances in your life, it's sort of the last thing you think of. But thank goodness it's there.
Exactly.
If you need that as one of your choices.
Exactly. But that term, I believe, has been made up by the anti-choice community to frame the debate, to make it seem as though there is a group of people who think everyone should be getting abortions, when I don't think that's the case.
So maybe if you think of it as being, if we think in statistical terms of a bell-shaped curve, you know, because in a bell-shaped curve you've got almost everybody is in that curve in the middle, and you have these two little extremes.
Yep.
Then maybe at the very extremes there might be a few people that would automatically, without thinking about it, become pregnant and choose to have an abortion without giving it a second thought.
Yeah.
There's probably a few at the other end that would never, ever, ever, ever consider an abortion for themselves in a real-life situation. And the rest of us are in that middle.
Yeah.
We're kind of the 60 or 70, maybe even higher percentage of people that like to have the opportunity to think for ourselves.
Yep. And I always say, you know, I think for most people, if you sat down and talked with them, they could tell you when they would or wouldn't. People have thought about this. Now, you never know what you really would do until you're faced with the situation.
Absolutely.
But you sit down with someone and they can kind of lay out for you when they would, when they wouldn't.
It's one of those life things that I guess, you know, obviously men never have the opportunity to think about this because they're never in that situation. So it's very easy for them generally to have thoughts about what they would do in a situation that they'll never be in.
Yeah.
But for women, quite often, in the case of rape or incest or anything along those lines, these are real-life situations that they have a real possibility that at some point in their life they're going to have to face.
Yep.
And so because of that, as you say, they think about, what would I do in a situation like that? But then again, when the situation, if the situation ever occurs, then you've got to, then it's a real life situation, and you have to think it through again and really decide what you're going to do in that particular circumstance.
Exactly.
So if we're talking about, let's define pro-life. What is pro-life? We've talked about what pro-choice is. We've talked about what anti-choice is. Is pro-life anti-choice?
So, I mean, I've already said that term, you know.
Yeah.
I think language is extremely important, and so the pro-choice community has coined the term anti-choice instead of saying pro-life, because we feel we're pro-life as well. Again, part of the mission of my organization is if a woman chooses to bear a healthy child, we're going to support her in that decision.
Yep.
And in general, I think we're pro-life in terms of supporting women in making important decisions. So we're pro-life of the woman, and then if she does want and chooses to have a child, you know, we support that. So that term, again, is a term claimed by the anti-choice community to move the debate, you know, to pin us against them. That they support life and that we don't, when in fact we do.
So as I suspect, you really can be pro-choice and pro-life at the same time.
Certainly.
They're not mutually exclusive at all.
Not at all.
And we've had libertarians on the show, you know, and we've found common ground on a lot of issues between progressives and libertarians, and there's quite a lot of common ground to be had there. And one of the interesting things that I've found with my guests who have been libertarians is that they are absolutely, as they stand against government interference in our lives as citizens, one of those things that they don't want the government infringing upon is a woman's right to choose. They don't generally think about those kinds of things. They're usually more economically guided. They think about economics and taxes and things of that nature. And but when they think about the question about choice, it's a natural extension of who they are and what they believe in against government infringing upon the lives of American citizens, that they naturally fall in with us in terms of being pro-choice. Now, I know Ron Paul, who was a candidate for president, a doctor, and also pro-life in the sense that that he doesn't believe that women should have abortions. I think he's really, in fact, on that issue, the exception rather than the rule within the Libertarian Party. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, what's also interesting with the pro-life and, again, supporting women in making choices, it's the very people who claim to be pro-life, anti-abortion are the very people who don't want women having access to information that could prevent the need for abortion. And so this year at the state capitol, we were working on a bill to get a 1-credit graduation requirement in health education so that young people in Connecticut would be given information, including abstinence, to prevent unintended pregnancy, protect themselves from disease. And the two groups that came out against that bill were the Connecticut Catholic Conference and the Family Institute of Connecticut. And so, for the very reason of groups that support sex education were backing this bill, even though it was for health education in general.
Sure.
So they came out against it. And that's where to say you're pro-life, well, to deny women the information they need to make an informed decision, I just don't see how that's supportive.
It seems almost schizophrenic to me that they would be against family planning, where family planning involves and promotes things like abstinence. Because I've got no problem with my kids. I would have loved if my kids have followed the path of abstinence. I think, sometimes kids being kids and raging hormones and all that, sometimes they fall into traps. But abstinence is a great thing. I mean, whatever it takes to keep kids from becoming pregnant and having to face a choice at a very young age, then that's great stuff. And learning how to use any of the paths of preventing pregnancy, it seems to me it's all a very important part of health education. And you were promoting a course for a 1-credit course for high school graduation, you mentioned? Was that?
Yes, so currently Connecticut doesn't have a state graduation requirement. Individual towns might. But actually the bill did pass with a half credit, and so if it doesn't get
Step in the right direction.
amended in future years, because the implementation is 2014, then the state would have a half credit. All that gets us, though, is a half credit graduation requirement in health. Then it really is down to groups like mine to kind of go in there and say, sex education is important, here's why, and ask towns to implement it. Again, including abstinence. I mean, that's 100% effective to prevent pregnancy and disease.
There's nothing more effective than that. You're right about that.
But abstinence-only programs, which were heavily funded during the Bush years and are slowly being weaned out under Obama, have shown that although they might delay sexual activity, when a young person does then decide to engage, they don't use protection. And so
they haven't learned how to be responsible adults.
Yeah, and abstinence-only programs actually only talk about the negative of contraception, so it really does set this negative tone to young people instead of giving them the truth. Again, it's about the truth.
Yeah.
And that's where, I mean, many pro-life people, as are religious, and that's when I have a conflict with the whole truth issue and religious organizations, you know.
I'll tell you, as a devout
Denying.
Christian, I have a lot of problems as a devout Christian with a lot of things that are promoted by churches. I mean, this whole idea that you shouldn't have guidance, positive guidance for your children, setting them on the right course of preventing pregnancy. It just seems crazy to me.
Yeah, very crazy.
Yeah. Now, what other facets of pro-life? I mean, if we're pro-life, what separates us as pro-life from people that are pro-life in the sense of the folks that are against us? I mean, you know, there are a lot of other things about being pro-life, a lot of other facets of life that I think we do a lot better job of promoting along with the rest of our pro-life stance.
Very true. And where I mean, what the pro-life community, the ones that determine themselves, a lot of people don't know that, I mean, in states, the fight has gone back to the states, really. I mean, it's at the federal level. We just saw it with health care reform. But state by state, pro-life groups are working really hard to chip away at a woman's right to access abortion. And the latest attack was in Missouri. A bill was introduced that allowed doctors, if the woman's screening came back, the doctor, and she might consider having an abortion, he could withhold information from her, a doctor. And that's just based on the mere fact that she might make the choice to have an abortion based on what he found and would tell her, he or she, being the doctor. And so pro-life groups, what I see is they come to the legislature and do, it's always attacks against a woman's right to access abortion, versus what you're getting at with being pro-life in the more general sense. Another bill we fought for this year was paid sick days. And you were mentioning that you had a guest on from the Working Families. We came at that issue from the standpoint of prenatal care.
Absolutely.
Connecticut has unbelievably high rates of reproductive health disparities, with low-income women not getting adequate prenatal care, having low infant births. And so we wanted to set the tone that in this state, we should at least give women 5 days paid so that they can get prenatal care. Because actually prenatal care, having just had a baby, it's well over 12 visits. So giving a woman 5 days off...
That's still only a partial solution.
Only partial.
But it's something at least.
Yeah, and it does set a tone that this state cares about preventative care. We say it a lot, but we don't pass policies that usually reflect that. And so I see that as being pro-life.
Absolutely.
Thinking about the entirety of life.
Respect for a child after it's born.
Yes.
I mean, why talk about respect for the unborn and then turn around and when a baby's born, just forget about it.
Exactly.
Just forget about it, and that's really sad.
Yeah. And that makes me think some other work we're starting to do. There are these places called crisis pregnancy centers. I don't know if you're familiar. Yeah, the billboards say, pregnant, need help. And when a woman calls, they're actually pro-life organizations, and so they won't, again, give women information. They give them misinformation about abortion. And we've also been told that some of these places will tell women that they'll be there for them, but then once a woman gets past the point of being able to get a legal abortion, they don't return her calls. And so, yet again, that's just a very traumatizing piece of what is she going to do now that she had the baby, and what kind of life is that child going to live if the mother really made the wrong choice in the end for her because she had kind of gotten persuaded in one direction and then doesn't have the support systems in place.
And it perpetuates poverty, not just among minorities, but among white women too. I mean, among women of all backgrounds, all economic, all socio backgrounds, everything. They and even more so, their child is almost doomed from the beginning, doomed to a life that's far less than what it could have been if they had gotten proper guidance and have an opportunity to take control of their own lives.
Exactly. And You know, when you're saying that, I can hear the other side, you know, but at least it's still a life. But then I would ask, you know, the anti-choice community to step up and really support legislation that would support the entirety of life. So come to the Capitol and work on bills that would empower low-income women, or education bills, you know, any kind of policy that's really going to be able to elevate the low-income people in this state. But I don't see the anti-choice community doing that. I only see them coming and trying to push bills that will restrict a woman's right to choose. Yeah. And that's where the conflict, I think, is that, you know, they should be more proactive as well, instead of always just making it this debate. I mean, there will always be people on either extremes. But I think there's a lot more common ground that we could come to the table over, that we never really get there because we're always having to fight this fight.
I have conversations all the time with people that have a fair amount of agreement with me on one issue or the other, and then have some disagreement on one issue or the other. And I want to put a plug in now for, well, Jeff will tell me I'm wrong calling it the coffee party movement. And he's correct, it's not the coffee party movement, but for the sake of discussion, I'm going to call it the coffee party movement, which is not, in fact, an answer to the Tea Party movement. In fact, what the coffee party movement, as I refer to it as, is people getting together and discussing issues in a calm and rational way, finding some common ground on some things, and things that people within that group, and we've had a lot of people that have come in that are disgruntled Tea Party members that just didn't like the fact that they were in an echo chamber there, where everybody had to walk in lockstep on issues, and there was no allowance for disagreement. A lot of them have filtered into the coffee party movement, and Jeff will come in probably and correct me on what I should be calling it, but we'll let him do that. But they've come in and we've had good discussions about even contentious issues, and we agree that we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves, and everybody gets a chance to talk in a civil fashion. And it's just amazing, we found, amazing how much agreement there is. Once we take the rhetoric out of the situation and get down to talking in real terms and real humane terms with one another, how much we agree on all these things, about all these things. We find so much agreement, and it's just very heartwarming to be able to sit down and talk to people that personally I don't agree with on issues. And I've had, as I said, I've had a lot of discussions with people on abortion, and I kind of freak them out because what I say to them, I'm pro-life and I'm pro-choice, and they're like, huh?
How can that be?
Yeah. And in fact, but the way I qualify myself as being pro-life is, as you talked about, I believe in taking care of the baby after it's born, making sure that the mom and the baby are healthy and have an opportunity to get health care, to get an education, to better themselves in life, to live a good, healthful, responsible life. And I'm also pro-life in the sense of being anti-war. Because how could somebody be pro-life and yet believe in letting kids be born and grow up and then sending them off to die and to kill other people? Where's the pro-life in that? I have to ask, people out there, where's the pro-life in that? How could you call yourselves pro-life if you're willing to support war? What other facets of pro-life should we be talking about?
Let's see. I'm trying to think of other policies where I've wanted them to get involved. I mean, again, the sex education's a big piece.
That's such a charged word. We've got to find some other way to express sex education.
Yeah.
Because it's not really about sex so much. It's about, it's more of a health education, I think.
Prevention. Again, it's prevention.
Exactly, yeah. It's sort of, in a sense, it's more anti-sex education.
Yeah.
Because you're educating kids to not be sexually active Or if they can't hold themselves back, if the hormones are raging too much, if you're going to do it, for God's sakes, at least take preventative measures. Be responsible. And it's tough for kids to be responsible. I mean, you know, they're not adults yet. They're in that transitional stage, and a little bit of responsibility, at least enough to take care of birth control and make sure that that there's not an unintended pregnancy. That's a little something to expect of our kids.
To learn about their bodies. I mean, when I talk to young people, and then my generation, we didn't get sex education.
Mine
and
neither.
so you send clueless kids out into the world.
Yeah.
How is that pro-life? So that's, you know, I mean, it's just not fair to not give people the tools they need to protect themselves. And again, pregnancy is one component, but in this day and age, disease. So we're sending young people out there without the information they need.
And mom and dad certainly are generally, and I know that from being a parent, mom and dad are generally are not real comfortable talking about sex with their own children. I mean, I had a hard time. I mean, you know, you tell it to them as best you can, but it's always better when it's coming from another adult or somebody else that's able to explain it without worrying about their children, how they're gonna take it, and you know, it's
And coming from both, I mean, it should definitely be parents and school together.
a team. Yeah.
Because too often these days parents assume it's happening at school, and then schools assume it must be happening at home. And so parent and school together kind of need to be on the same page.
Otherwise, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, exactly.
If nobody's taking care of business, then...
And if no one's following up, you know, your kid learned something in school, it would be great to follow up with that conversation at home. And so that kids know where parents stand on these issues.
And there's solid evidence. You know, you mentioned about during the Bush administration, we had this abstinence-only education. And in fact, during those years, not only did teen pregnancy go up, but abortion went up.
Yeah.
Whereas when you had Bill Clinton in office for 8 years, although he had his sexual issues, if you will, but we all know about, okay, we're going to cut off there, we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to continue the discussion about all these very uncomfortable topics to talk about. But I'm David Stevenson, Progressive Soup, Jillian Gilchrist from NARAL Pro Choice Connecticut, Executive Director. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll talk some more about this. Good night.